In the middle of his concert, Elvis stopped the music and said, "I want to show you a hero." The soldier standing in the crowd looked around in confusion when he realized Elvis was talking about him. No one saw him as a hero until Elvis made that announcement that night. The Las Vegas International Hotel was electric with anticipation on that humid summer evening in 1971. The venue, with its red velvet seats and golden chandeliers, had become Elvis Presley's second home during his legendary residency. Tonight marked the 15th show of his summer engagement, and the energy in the room was palpable as thousands of fans from across the country had gathered to witness the king of rock and roll in his prime. The audience was a diverse tapestry of humanity. Young couples on romantic getaways, middle-aged fans who had followed Elvis since his early days, elderly admirers who remembered when he first appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, and families who had saved for months to afford tickets to see their idol perform live. The air buzzed with conversations in multiple languages, laughter, and the gentle clinking of glasses as waiters moved efficiently between tables, serving cocktails and appetizers to the eager crowd. Among this sea of excited faces sat a solitary figure who seemed oddly out of place amidst all the celebration and joy. Sergeant Michael Patterson, a 24-year-old man with close-cropped sandy hair and eyes that held depths of experience far beyond his years, sat rigidly upright in his crisp army dress uniform. The green fabric was immaculate, every button polished to perfection, every crease sharp enough to cut paper. His chest bore the weight of several ribbons and medals, including the Purple Heart that caught the stage lights intermittently, creating small flashes of color against the dark fabric. Michael had arrived at the hotel alone, having purchased his ticket with money he had been saving for months. He had been discharged from active duty just 3 weeks earlier, after serving 2 tours of duty in Vietnam that had changed him in ways he was still trying to understand. The transition back to civilian life had proven more difficult than any battlefield he had faced overseas. The sounds, the smells, the constant state of alertness that had kept him alive in the jungle now felt like a prison in the peaceful suburbs of his hometown. His family had thrown him a welcome home party, complete with yellow ribbons and flag decorations, but Michael had felt like a stranger at his own celebration. His younger brother talked excitedly about college football and fraternity parties, while his father asked repeatedly if he was okay, with a worried expression that made Michael's chest tighten with guilt. His mother fussed over him constantly, trying to feed him his favorite childhood foods and treating him like he might break at any moment. The worst part was the looks he received from people on the street. Some averted their eyes entirely, as if his uniform made them uncomfortable. Others stared with a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been pity. A few had actually thanked him for his service, but their words felt hollow and rehearsed, as if they were checking off a box on some social obligation checklist. Michael had come to the Elvis concert hoping that music might provide some escape from the constant noise in his head, the memories that surfaced without warning, the hypervigilance that made him jump at sudden sounds, the feeling of being completely alone, even when surrounded by people who claimed to love him. Elvis's music had been a comfort to him during his darkest moments overseas. Soldiers would gather around portable radios in their bunkers, listening to "Can't Help Falling in Love" and "Love Me Tender," dreaming of the lives they had left behind and hoped to return to. As Michael sat in the darkened venue, he felt the familiar weight of isolation settling around his shoulders like a heavy blanket. The people at the tables around him were laughing, singing along with the opening acts, and sharing intimate conversations over drinks. He envied their lightness, their ability to exist in the moment without the constant undercurrent of vigilance that had become his default state. He had tried to explain the feeling to his family, but how could he make them understand what it was like to sleep with one eye open for 2 years, always listening for sounds that might mean danger? The stage lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd as anticipation reached its peak. Then, in a blaze of spotlights and thunderous applause, Elvis appeared on stage wearing his iconic white jumpsuit, adorned with elaborate rhinestone designs that caught the light and made him shimmer like a celestial being. His presence was magnetic, commanding the attention of every person in the room with an energy that seemed to pulse through the very air itself. "Thank you. Thank you very much," Elvis said into the microphone, his distinctive voice sending waves of excitement through the audience. The crowd erupted in screams and applause that lasted several minutes before finally quieting down enough for him to continue. "It's good to be back in Las Vegas, and it's good to see all you beautiful people tonight." Elvis launched into his opening number, "That's All Right," and the entire venue came alive with music. His voice was powerful and smooth, filling every corner of the room with its warmth and charisma. The band behind him was tight and professional, providing the perfect backdrop for Elvis's commanding performance. He moved across the stage with the confidence of a man who was born to entertain, his every gesture calculated to maximize the emotional impact on his audience. For the first time in weeks, Michael felt some of the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. The music washed over him like a warm wave, temporarily drowning out the constant chatter of anxiety in his mind. He found himself remembering better times, sitting in his childhood bedroom listening to Elvis records, dancing with his high school girlfriend at the senior prom to "Love Me Tender," the dreams he had once held of becoming a musician himself before life took him in a different direction. Elvis moved through his set list with the practiced ease of a master performer. He sang "Hound Dog" with playful energy that had the entire audience clapping along, "Don't Be Cruel" with a swagger that reminded everyone why he was called the king, and "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" with a vulnerability that brought tears to many eyes. Throughout each song, his keen performer's instincts kept his attention partially focused on the audience, reading their faces and adjusting his performance to maximize their emotional connection to the music. It was during the instrumental break of "Suspicious Minds" that Elvis's attention was drawn to something that made him pause. In the midst of all the screaming, clapping, and celebration that filled the venue like a joyous thunderstorm, he noticed a figure that stood out from the crowd like a lone tree in an empty field. A young man in military dress uniform was sitting absolutely still, tears streaming down his face in steady rivulets that caught the stage lights. There was something about the soldier's posture, the way he held himself with military precision even while crying, that immediately caught Elvis's attention. The man's shoulders were squared, his back straight, but his face showed a pain so profound that it seemed to radiate outward like heat from a fire. Elvis had always prided himself on his ability to connect with his audience, to read their emotions and understand their needs. But this young man's suffering was so palpable that it cut through all the noise and celebration around him. Elvis had grown up in poverty in Tupelo, Mississippi, and later in Memphis, Tennessee. He understood struggle, hardship, and the feeling of being an outsider. He had also lived through the uncertainty of his own military service, though his experience had been vastly different from what this young soldier had likely endured. Something about the man's tears spoke to Elvis on a level deeper than mere sympathy. It was recognition of one human being seeing another in pain and feeling compelled to act. Without breaking his rhythm with the music, Elvis continued to observe the soldier throughout the next several songs. The young man never moved, never acknowledged the excited fans around him, never even seemed to notice that he was crying. His eyes were fixed on some distant point beyond the stage, as if he was seeing something that existed only in his memory. The tears continued to flow, not the joyful tears of an excited fan, but something much deeper and more sorrowful. As Elvis transitioned into "Love Me Tender," one of his most gentle and emotional songs, he made a decision that would change the entire trajectory of the evening. He stepped away from his microphone stand and walked to the edge of the stage, his eyes focused directly on the young soldier. The audience sensed that something significant was about to happen, and a hush began to fall over the crowd as Elvis raised his hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice cutting through the sudden quiet like a knife through silk, "I want to stop for just a moment here. The band continued to play softly behind him, but all attention was focused on the king as he stood at the edge of the stage, looking out into the audience with an expression of deep seriousness. "You know, we live in troubled times," Elvis continued, his voice carrying the weight of genuine emotion. "There are young men who have gone far from home to serve our country, who have seen things and done things that the rest of us can barely imagine. And sometimes, when they come home, we don't do a very good job of showing them how much we appreciate their sacrifice." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Many people were looking around, trying to figure out what had prompted this unexpected speech from their beloved entertainer. Elvis's words carried a gravitas that transformed the atmosphere in the room from celebratory to reverential. "I see someone out there tonight," Elvis said, pointing gently toward Michael's section of the audience. "A young man in uniform who has served our country with honor, and I want to show you a hero." Michael's blood ran cold as he realized that Elvis was looking directly at him. His heart began to pound so hard that he could feel it in his temples, and for a moment he thought he might pass out from the sudden rush of adrenaline. He looked around frantically, hoping that Elvis might be talking about someone else, but the spotlights were beginning to swing in his direction, and people in the nearby tables were turning to look at him with curious expressions. "Son, would you stand up for us?" Elvis asked, his voice gentle but carrying enough authority that it reached every corner of the venue. "Don't be shy now. Let these good people see what a real hero looks like." Michael's first instinct was to flee. Every muscle in his body tensed as his fight-or-flight response kicked into overdrive. He had spent months trying to avoid attention, trying to blend into the background, trying to become invisible so that people wouldn't look at him with those expressions of curiosity, pity, or judgment. The last thing he wanted was to be the center of attention in front of thousands of strangers. But something in Elvis's voice, something in the genuine respect and warmth that emanated from the stage, made Michael feel safer than he had in months. Slowly, with legs that felt like they were made of concrete, he rose from his chair. The spotlight found him immediately, illuminating his uniform and the medals on his chest for everyone in the venue to see. The reaction from the audience was immediate and overwhelming. Applause erupted from every corner of the room, not the excited screaming of Elvis fans, but something deeper and more meaningful. People were standing now, some with tears in their eyes, all of them clapping for this young soldier who had served their country in a war that many of them didn't fully understand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said as the applause continued, "Sergeant Michael Patterson, United States Army." Elvis had somehow learned Michael's name, though Michael couldn't figure out how. "This young man has just returned from 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, and he's wearing the Purple Heart, which means he was wounded in service to our country." The applause grew even louder, and Michael felt his knees go weak. He had expected judgment, curiosity, or pity, but instead he was receiving something he had never experienced before: genuine appreciation and respect from a room full of strangers. For the first time since his return, he felt seen not as a damaged veteran or a reminder of an unpopular war, but as a human being who had made sacrifices for something larger than himself. "Sergeant Patterson," Elvis called out, "would you do me the honor of joining me up here on stage?" Michael's eyes widened in shock. The idea of being on stage in front of thousands of people terrified him almost as much as anything he had faced in combat. But the warmth in Elvis's voice, the genuine invitation in his words, and the supportive applause of the audience gave him courage he didn't know he possessed. Step by careful step, he made his way through the crowd as people moved aside to create a path for him. When Michael reached the stage, Elvis was there to help him up the steps. The king of rock and roll extended his hand with a smile that radiated genuine warmth and respect. "Welcome, son," Elvis said, placing a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. "Thank you for your service." Standing on the stage under the bright lights, with thousands of people looking up at him, Michael felt exposed and vulnerable in a way that was completely different from anything he had experienced in Vietnam. In the jungle, danger came from external threats that he could fight or hide from. Here, The vulnerability came from being truly seen by other human beings, from allowing himself to be recognized for who he was and what he had been through. "Tell me, Sergeant," Elvis said, keeping his voice gentle and conversational, "how does it feel to be home?" It was such a simple question, but it hit Michael like a physical blow. How could he explain that home didn't feel like home anymore? How could he describe the sensation of being a stranger in his own life, of feeling disconnected from everyone and everything that had once brought him comfort? How could he convey the guilt he felt for surviving when so many of his friends hadn't made it back? "It's complicated, sir," Michael managed to say, his voice barely audible even with the microphone nearby. Elvis nodded with understanding that seemed to go deeper than mere sympathy. "I imagine it is, son. You've been places and seen things that most of us never will. That changes a person." The simple acknowledgement of his experience, spoken without judgment or pity, brought fresh tears to Michael's eyes. For months, people had been telling him to move on, to put it behind him, to be grateful to be alive. Elvis was the first person to simply recognize that he had been changed by his experiences without trying to minimize or fix those changes. "You know," Elvis continued, speaking not just to Michael, but to the entire audience, "I had the privilege of serving in the Army myself, though my experience was nothing like what this young man has been through. But I learned something during my time in service about what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself, about the brotherhood that develops between soldiers, and about the sacrifice that military service requires." Elvis turned back to Michael, his expression serious and respectful. "I want you to know that your service matters, your sacrifice matters, and you are not alone." The words hit Michael with unexpected force. For months he had felt completely isolated, cut off from everyone around him by experiences they couldn't understand and memories they couldn't share. To hear someone acknowledge his service without qualification, without political commentary, without trying to debate the merits of the war itself, was healing in a way that months of well-meaning family conversations had not been. "Now," Elvis said, his tone shifting slightly toward something lighter, "I understand you might not feel much like a hero right now. A lot of heroes don't, but I want you to know that everyone in this room sees you as one, and I hope that someday you'll be able to see yourself that way too." Elvis then did something completely unexpected. He began to sing "Bridge Over Troubled Water," the Simon and Garfunkel song that had become an anthem of comfort and support. His voice, powerful and filled with emotion, transformed the song into something sacred. As he sang, he kept one hand on Michael's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and support that spoke louder than any words could have. The audience was completely mesmerized. Many people were crying openly, moved not just by Elvis's beautiful rendition of the song, but by the genuine human connection they were witnessing on stage. Here was one of the most famous entertainers in the world, using his platform not just to perform, but to heal, to honor, and to create a moment of profound meaning. When the song ended, the applause was deafening. People were on their feet, cheering not just for Elvis, but for Michael, for the moment they had all shared, for the recognition of service and sacrifice that had been given voice. Michael stood there, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from thousands of strangers who had never met him but were honoring him simply because Elvis had asked them to see him as a hero. "Sergeant Patterson," Elvis said as the applause finally began to die down, "I want you to know that you always have a place at my shows. Anytime you need to remember that you matter, that your service was important, that you are valued and respected, you come see me. You're family now." The gesture was more than just a kind offer, it was a lifeline. Elvis was offering Michael something that no amount of therapy or family support had been able to provide. A place where he would always be welcomed, not despite his military service, but because of it. A place where his experiences would be honored rather than ignored or misunderstood. Michael tried to speak, to express his gratitude, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply nodded, tears streaming down his face as he shook Elvis's hand. The handshake lasted longer than a typical greeting, becoming a moment of genuine human connection between two men who had both served their country in different ways. Elvis kept Michael on stage for the rest of the concert, giving him a front row seat to one of the most intimate and powerful performances of the King's career. Every song seemed to carry extra meaning. Every gesture toward the audience included acknowledgement of the young soldier standing beside him. The concert had been transformed from entertainment into something approaching a religious experience, a celebration of human connection, sacrifice, and the healing power of music. As the evening drew to a close, Elvis addressed the audience one final time. "Tonight, you've all been part of something special. You've helped me honor a true American hero, and you've shown that this country knows how to take care of its own. I want you to remember Sergeant Michael Patterson, and I want you to remember that there are thousands of young men like him who have served our country with honor and deserve our respect and support." The final applause of the evening lasted nearly 10 minutes, with the entire audience on their feet, many of them looking directly at Michael as they clapped. For the first time since his return from Vietnam, Michael felt truly welcomed home, not with platitudes or uncomfortable small talk, but with genuine recognition of his service and sacrifice. As the lights came up and the audience began to file out of the venue, many people made their way toward the stage to personally thank Michael for his service. Unlike the hollow-sounding thanks he had received from strangers on the street, these expressions of gratitude felt genuine and heartfelt, inspired by Elvis's authentic recognition of Michael's heroism. Backstage, Elvis spent nearly an hour with Michael, asking about his experiences, listening to his stories, and offering words of encouragement that came from a place of genuine understanding. Elvis shared stories of his own military service, talked about the responsibility that came with being in the public eye, and offered Michael practical advice about dealing with the challenges of readjustment. "The thing about being a hero," Elvis told Michael as their conversation wound down, "is that heroes don't get to choose when they're done being heroes. People are going to look up to you for the rest of your life because of what you've done. That's a burden. But it's also a gift. You have the power to inspire others, to help them find courage when they need it most." Elvis's words would prove prophetic. News of the concert spread quickly, and Michael found himself becoming something of a celebrity in his hometown. But rather than feeling burdened by the attention, he discovered that Elvis had been right about the power to inspire others. He began speaking at schools and community events, sharing his story and helping other veterans feel less alone in their struggles with readjustment. The concert that night became legendary among Elvis fans, but for Michael, it represented something much more personal and profound. It was the night that he learned that heroism isn't about feeling brave or strong or invincible. It's about serving something larger than yourself, even when you're scared, even when you're broken, even when you don't feel like a hero at all. Years later, Michael would often say that Elvis saved his life that night, not through any grand gesture or magical intervention, but simply by seeing him, acknowledging his pain, and helping him understand that his service and his sacrifice mattered. In a world that seemed indifferent to the struggles of returning veterans, Elvis had created a moment of pure recognition and respect that helped Michael find his way back to himself. The ripple effects of that single evening continued for decades. Michael became an advocate for veterans' rights, using the platform that Elvis had given him to help other soldiers receive the support and recognition they deserved. He married, had children, and built a life that honored both his service to his country and the lesson Elvis had taught him about the importance of seeing and valuing the heroism in ordinary people. And true to his word, Elvis made sure that Michael always had tickets to his shows. For the rest of Elvis's career, whenever he performed in Las Vegas or anywhere else that Michael could attend, there would be a special seat reserved for the young soldier who had taught the king of rock and roll something important about the true meaning of heroism. The story of that night became part of Elvis's legacy, proof that his greatness extended far beyond his musical talent. He had used his platform not just to entertain, but to heal, to honor and to remind an entire audience that heroism comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never see themselves as heroes at all.